Hello, fellow Mystery Files. Today I am finishing up my ranking of all the non-Poirot, non-Marple Christie novels. This video contains the top 10 of these books, all of which are fairly strong in my opinion. Fair warning, I will be spoiling these books, but I will try to keep the spoilers to as close to a minimum as possible. There's no time to waste, so let's get started at number 10, where I put the Christie novel that is set it in the earliest time, and that is Death Comes as the End. This is the very first historical mystery novel ever written, and Christie does an excellent job of it. She invokes the setting very well. It feels very much like we're in ancient Egypt. To me, this is particularly evident in the way the characters react to situations where many of them are very much convinced the supernatural is at the cause of these murders. This would only really work in this book, as contemporary British people would not likely believe a ghost is at work. This is a rather unique mystery because we don't have a professional detective. We don't even have a police force or the generic inspector character. We do have a loose band of relatives sort of working together to find the killer. Most members of the family are keen to believe that Nofret's ghost is haunting them, which is, of course, not the case. There are a lot of murders in this one, about seven, and each one contributes something to the plot. It's not a case of padding a story out by adding more bodies. I love the way these people are killed, as it feels very much like the way someone would be murdered in ancient Egypt. Two people are pushed off cliffs, some others are poisoned in wine or ointment, one is smothered in mummy linen, which I always felt was a very nice touch. Christie uses a lot of juxtaposition of tone in this book. It starts off quite serious with Ren and Seb returning home after being widowed, and Imhotep bringing in his new concubine Nofret into the house, and this really disrupts everyone's lives. Then the murders begin, and everyone is petrified. Satipi, in particular, is very afraid despite being this overbearing woman when we first meet her. But then there's some very humorous moments as well. Annette is a wonderful character who provides a lot of comic relief, and I always love her murder scene where she is suffocated in the linen right when she's on a power trip. I love the moment when everyone realizes they have too many dead bodies on their hands and they're running out of linen to wrap them up in. Has a great death scene where, in a rare Christie moment, we're with her when she dies. And not only that, we hear her internal thoughts as she realizes that she's been poisoned and is dying. It's actually quite a terrifying scene to read. The reason why I don't have this book higher is because I don't think the mystery is at its highest level, and certainly not to the high level of most of the remaining nine novels. Despite all the chaos and murders in this one, the mechanics are rather simple, and by the end, so many characters have been murdered that there are very few viable suspects left, so it is kind of obvious after a while who is responsible for the murders. Death Comes as the End is a very good read, but I do think its biggest strengths are the setting and the characters, and not necessarily the mystery plot, so I have it here at number 10. Now, for number 9, I have the very first Christie thriller and the first appearance of Tommy and Tuppence, The Secret Adversary. There are a few things that set this novel above most of the other thrillers. First and foremost is the appearance of Tommy and Tuppence, who are not yet married in this novel. I think of all the novels that introduce a major recurring Christie character, The Secret Adversary introduces those characters the best. I just love Tommy and Tuppence here. They're on the side of good, but there is that little sinister bit of them that tries to extort money from some people, and not in the most ethical manner. I love their adventurous spirit. I love Tommy's headstrong attitude and Tuppence's cooler mind, yet they both possess the opposite spirit at times as well. I love how they have nothing to lose and just jump into finding Jane Finn despite their lack of skill and the danger ahead, and they don't let that stop them. We meet Albert for the first time, and he's just a little kid here operating an elevator, but he has some great moments as well. In terms of the plot, the secret adversary is high stakes and clearly defined from the start, which are two things the previous thrillers lacked. We know the criminal is the unknown Mr. Brown, and he wants to humiliate the British government and possibly lead a Bolshevik coup. Tommy and Tuppence find themselves in danger so many times, with Tommy being conked on the head and kidnapped, and Tuppence disappears toward the end of the novel. The suspense and drama in this one feels real. It doesn't feel manufactured for the sake of creating the drama. I think many of the other characters are developed enough, much more than the side characters typically are in a Christie thriller. The reason why I don't have this higher is because of a similar issue Death Comes as the End has, where there really aren't a lot of suspects. Besides Tuppence, there's only other one female character who lives until the end of the novel, so Annette has to be Jane Finn. There are no other options. Now, I will say there are really only two options for who Mr. Brown can be. It's either Sir James or Julius Hersheimer, and that is a much better mystery because both stand an equal chance, but the reveal of both Jane Finn and Mr. Brown aren't really the big shockers they were meant to be. But nonetheless, this is a very fun and high quality thriller novel, so I place it here at number 9. Now, at number 8 is a novel that I see very often held in high regard, and I agree, but I have a number of issues with it that I can't place it higher on the list, and that is Sparkling Cyanide. And this is one of the most difficult titles for me to decide what to do with. I think this novel is better than the sum of its parts. I will start with the good. I love the setting of this book. I think having a murder in a restaurant is very unique, and it doesn't happen in the Golden Age as often as one might suspect. You really get the feel for what the restaurant looks like and what the atmosphere is. I think the characters are fantastic for the most part. Almost all of them are expertly drawn, that we know exactly how they will react in certain situations, and we really get to the inner essence of these people. Anthony Brown is probably Christie's best of these well intentioned rogue characters she writes a lot. I appreciate how gray his character is, where it's an open issue if he's a scoundrel or a gentleman, and does he have an ulterior motive regarding either Rosemary or Iris? In general, I think the murder plot is good but problematic. We start off with George Barton trying to prove his wife Rosemary did not commit suicide a year prior, but was actually murdered. He recreates the dinner she died at and invites all of the same people, only he drops dead from cyanide poisoning instead. This is a great setup, but then it takes a slight turn for the worse where it becomes apparent that George was murdered by accident and Iris was the intended target. The accidental death of George could have been a great obfuscation, but instead Chrissy dismisses this to focus on Iris, who is probably the blandest character in the book. She is in the mold of this generic, flighty young woman and is basically a little more than a stock character. I also have some problems with the murder logistics, specifically the part where Iris's purse falls off her chair in the restaurant and the waiter replaces it in the wrong spot. As a result, everyone shifts their seat one spot over, which is how George is murdered accidentally. I find this questionable because I am someone who is constantly aware of these things. I would know instantly if I were not sitting in the right seat at a restaurant. I also take issue with one of the conspirators, Victor Drake, as we never really meet him. We hear and learn a lot about him, but we don't actually get to know him as himself in the flesh. Now, the physical murder is Ruth Lessing, who we do meet, and I appreciate the pun with her name being similar to Ruthless, but I do think anyone involved with the murder plot should be a major character we actually meet. However, as big of knocks as these things are, they don't really affect the reading experience for me, so I have Sparkling Cyanide here at number 8. At number 7, I have the highest ranked thriller and the highest ranked Tommy and Tuppence novel, and that is NRM. Now, I know The Secret Adversary is generally considered to be the best Tommy and Tuppence, but I disagree. I think NRM does everything The Secret Adversary does, but in a more entertaining and more dramatic fashion. This is the best insight into Tommy and Tuppence, who are now middle aged. We're in the midst of World War II, and the Beresfords are eager to get involved, but no one wants them because they're older now. Eventually, Tommy is wanted to go undercover in a boarding house where people are waiting out the Blitz. And this is a great scene where Tuppence hides in the cabinet to listen in on Tommy and the agent, and she actually gets to the boarding house before Tommy does. And they spend the rest of the novel masquerading as Mr. Meadows and Mrs. Blankensop, and they're so bad at it. They're constantly making mistakes and they can't keep their story straight, but they do good work in tracking down the enemy agents called N and M. Of all the Tommy and Tuppence books, this one, while still a thriller, feels the most like a traditional mystery. We have a mostly close circle of suspects and two villains who must be identified. A lot of the characters are completely developed, but they are well drawn enough and interesting. Christie plays a lot with people's prejudices against foreigners in this one, where there are quite a few non British characters, all of whom are suspicious, but have very innocent and courageous backstories. There's a great clue in this book when Betty Sprott is kidnapped by the Polish woman, and her mother shoots the woman while she's holding Betty. Tuppence later reveals that a mother would never dare shoot the person holding her child, which leads her to correctly deduce that Mrs. Sprott is not really Betty's mother. The Polish woman was Betty's real mother, who took her back from the enemy agent using her as a tool. I think this is all very good as it plays into Tuppence's character as a concerned mother herself, with two children serving in different capacities in the war. Now, this novel does have a few knocks. It is a thriller, so we do have the typical Christie thriller elements like people parachuting into town and secret passages in the bathroom and overly shocking revelations. I think the reveal that Commander Haydock is N is a bit lackluster, as that is just sort of told to us, and he didn't really have any contact with Mrs. Sprott to hint they were conspirators. But on the flip side, Christie expertly depicts what it's like to live through World War II. Typically, we only get the after effects of the war on characters, but in this book, we are in the middle of the action. The tone is rather gloomy and not at all optimistic, even after the enemy agents are captured. N or M is the best Christie thriller, but it only comes in here at number 7. At number 6, I have A Last Minute Change. I originally had this book at number 4, but then I decided to bring it down just before I recorded this video, and that is Ordeal by Innocence. And when I started thinking about this book more, I realized it has some shortfalls that I think are easy to glance over. I know this is generally considered one of the best Christies, but I think I would put it just out of that category. I don't think it's top tier, although there is a lot to recommend it. This is not a unique theme to Christie, but Ordeal by Innocence is Christie's most in depth look into the effects of murder upon the innocent. I think once again, this book has a great opening with Dr. Calgary telling the Argyles that their son Jacko did not kill his mother Rachel. And I love the way Christie handles this because the Argyles are very upset to hear this. Jacko was their preferable killer, and they had moved on with their lives. And Dr. Calgary cannot wrap his head around any of this. This is a very unique outlook on this situation. I also really appreciate how Jacko is not technically innocent either. There are so many mystery novels, including many by Christie, where someone is wrongfully accused and then turns out to be completely innocent at the end of the novel. To have that person be a conspirator and the brains behind the operation was a nice twist. There's a lot of good character work in this book, particularly with Jacko and what kind of person he is, and the solution lies within that, which elevates this book up in the list. I've always found this book to be a little on the spookier side. I imagine the Argyles in this isolated house with an unknown murderer, and the weather is often dark and stormy. I think Christie really captures the emotions and the tensions among these characters as well. The Argylls begin suspecting and mistrusting each other, and this is something we don't really see a lot of in other Christie works with the same theme. Yes, we might get one character distrusting another, but this is on such a large scale, it's an excellent look into the human psychology. I do have some major issues with this book, however. I think the mystery plot has a lot of holes in it. I think Kirsten is not an interesting enough character to be the murderer. I like how Jacko tricked her into thinking he loved her and into killing Rachel for him, and how she held her tongue because she found out Jacko was married. But in general, I think she is underdeveloped as a character for the role. It's also never explained why Jacko didn't just say that it was Kirsten since he knew all the details and he's already going to prison for murder, but he doesn't try to spare himself. And what really hurts this novel, in my opinion, and why I lowered it to number 6, is the family dynamics. The Argyle children are all adopted, and this is portrayed in such a bizarre way. And this, again, is not unique to this novel, but is most prevalent here. There are constant mentions about how this isn't a real family and how the children hate their parents because they're adopted, and how Leo doesn't even act like a father to these kids because it was really his wife Rachel who adopted them. And this is all so strange. And then we have what I consider to be the worst romance in a Christie novel between Mickey and Tina, who are adopted brother and sister. But because they're both adopted, nobody thinks this is weird, despite the fact that they've been siblings since they were small children. This is all really uncomfortable to read, and it does damper a very good book that I have to place here at number 6. Now, for number 5, I have a novel that is also generally considered one of Christie's best, and that is Endless Night. And this is a bit of the reverse for me, where I think Christie typically opens her novels fantastically, but I think this one actually opens up a bit on the weaker side. I think the first half to two-thirds of this book slogs considerably. It's very biographical, with Michael Rogers telling his story, and it's all fine, but it's a little bit slow. But the final third or so is some roller coaster ride where all of those tiny details from the beginning of the story come through, and you can pick out the meaning of this action and that action, and you can see all of the foreshadowing and all of the work Christie put into crafting the story really pay off. This book reuses the trick of the narrator being the murderer, and it pays off just as well here as it did the first time. Michael Rogers is an excellent character. He's the rare working class hero in a Christie novel, or even really a Golden Age mystery, although technically we are out of the Golden Age by the time this book was published. He's this very genteel young man, madly in love with a young woman, and has lofty dreams he doesn't think he will ever be able to accomplish. But when that mask comes off, oh boy, does it come off. It's actually a rather ruthless young man who marries Ellie for her money only to kill her so he can actually marry the woman he really loves. We are only with Michael very briefly after that mask comes off, but it's a very chilling sequence. And when you think back on the story, you will see it was there the whole time. He's one of Christie's best drawn killers. I think the actual murder plot is a little weak, but in this kind of story which focuses on the characters, it doesn't really matter to me. It all works just fine, that the minor complaints I have amount really to nothing. For instance, I do wonder how someone could be so stupid to take a random pill she found in an abandoned shack in the woods, but I'm not going to question it. People do stupid things all the time. The reason why I don't have this book higher is because I just feel the top four books are easier reads, in my opinion. Like I said, the beginning of Endless Night does slog and is a much more serious book than the other four, which I also think are very high quality, so I placed Endless Night here at number 5. At number 4, I have a book that I really love, and I never can understand why this book is often overlooked, and that is Towards Zero. I love what Christie does with this book, where she explains her philosophy about mystery novels. She explains that murder mysteries don't begin with the murder is the end of the story, and all the events that lead up to the murder is the beginning. I very much agree with this sentiment. I love a mystery novel that works up to the murder where we see the events play out instead of having to be told about them passively. I often see these tips on how to write mystery novels that state that the story begins with the murder, and this is really the wrong way to look about it. There are so many classic Christie stories that have late book murders, and Toward Zero is the perfect example of this. Neville Strange is one of Christie's best murderers. The scene of his reveal is expertly written. Like Michael Rogers, that mask comes off and it cannot be put back on. The transformation of Neville Strange from this kindly, inoffensive tennis player to a raging psychopath is so stunning and so good. It might very well be the best reveal of any Christie killer. I love the mechanics of the murder, even if I do find them a bit overmuch and convoluted. The fact that Neville kills Lady Tressilian not for his own gain, but just to get Audrey hanged for murder is very clever and very devious. And the way he does this by making it look like Audrey framed him is a nice twist on the traditional framing the guilty party trope. I'm not the biggest fan of all the running around the island Neville has to do, not only to murder Lady Tressilian and establish an alibi, but also to murder Mr. Treves earlier in the novel. The biggest knock for me is the murder of Mr. Treves, where Neville places an out of order sign on the elevator door, so Treves has to take the stairs up to his room, and that will somehow make him have a heart attack. I just don't think that's very likely to work in real life, and it's extremely contrived. What makes this novel so special to me is how Christie utilizes all of the characters' lives before the murder later on in the novel. The way Superintendent Battle knows Audrey is innocent after she confesses is because she has the same look on her face that his daughter did when she confessed with that she didn't commit. And that's just the best example of these moments, but there are so many others that demonstrate why the murder mystery cannot begin with the murder. So I have Towards Zero here at number 4. I kept going back and forth between these next two novels over which one should be second and which should be third, but I did decide to place here at number 3 The Pale Horse. And I've always found this book to have a very unique feel about it. It's not really like any other Christie novel. It's heavy on the supernatural elements, and I think Christie handles it very well, where we are never supposed to believe the supernatural is real, and the characters don't really treat it as such, with a few exceptions. I like how grand the story is. This is a rare Christie murder mystery with a plot that isn't really intimate. It's essentially a business transaction slash murder for hire plot, but is transported to a small village to give it that traditional close knit feel we expect from most Christie novels. Christie really captures the haunting atmosphere, where there are a lot of scenes set in the fog or late at night, and that gels well with the otherwise spooky mystery plot. I think the characters are mostly strong, but none of them are really that vivid. However, there aren't any duds, and there are a lot of characters who come in and out of this book, so that's quite the feat. Zachariah Osborne is a fun murderer. I like the mistakes he makes where he tries to incriminate Mr. Venables, only to learn that Venables is confined to a wheelchair and cannot physically commit the murders, and he's forced to keep this story up because he can't change it at this point. He's too far into it. I like the witches at the Pale Horse Inn, as they are fun characters, and two of them actually believe in the supernatural, which I always find funny. I like the little cameos we get from Ariadne Oliver, the Dane Caltrops from The Moving Finger, and the Desparts from Cards on the Table. These connect all of Christie's different detectives into one universe, and I appreciate that. But what makes this book for me is the murder plot. It's a murder for hire business. People who want someone dead visit this lawyer who sends them to the Pale Horse. The lawyer makes a bet that the target will die soon, and if that is the case, the client must pay. And I think these murders are executed beautifully. Hired women are paid to visit the target's house and take a survey of what products they use. These products are then laced with thallium poisoning, which slowly kills them, but gives them the appearance that they died naturally. Now, I do think this plot is overly convoluted and very likely to fail, but it is brilliant. The use of thallium is genius, with the victim's hair falling out being the only real clue to solve the mystery. Overall, this is a very spooky and clever plot, so I place the Pale Horse here at number 3. Now, at number 2, I have a novel I'm a little surprised is this high because I never really think of it as one of Christie's best, but it is an excellent book, and that is Crooked House. And this is another novel that is a little on the spookier side, in my opinion, but it lacks the supernatural elements. We have the Leonidas extended family living together in this dilapidated mansion that gives off these haunted house vibes. But the best thing about this book is its characters. The Leonidas family are top tier Christie dysfunctional family. They are all over the top, but Christie writes them with great restraint that it prevents them from becoming caricatures. They feel like real people. We have Magda, the hammy actress, and Roger, this loser businessman. And most importantly, we have our murderer, Josephine Leonidas, a 12-year-old girl. And I love the way Christie handles a child murderer here, where we usually see child murderers in the media depicted as social outcasts or violent school shooters, but Josephine is a purely selfish, ruthless child who kills for her own personal gain, just like so many adult Christie murderers. Specifically, she kills her grandfather because he won't pay for her ballet lessons. She then kills her nanny because she called her a silly little girl. Josephine is just a completely ruthless killer, one of the most ruthless in the Christie canon. I love the murder plot as well, where it's a very simple plot and one only one a child would concoct, and there is so much evidence incriminating Josephine, but is largely ignored by the readers and the characters, specifically the protagonist Charles Hayward. This is a clever trick because typically in Christie novels, children are largely ignored as both characters and suspects, and the other characters are just too self conceited and self absorbed, and they don't see what's right in front of them. I like how Aunt Edith is the one who solves the crimes because she's the only one paying attention to other people and she's the only one looking to anything that's going on. And now, she does take the blame for the murders and she winds up committing suicide and killing Josephine as well. And I think this is a suitable ending because I do think the aftermath of having a child murderer is a little. Controversial for the times, and how would Chrissy depict that in a novel if she were to be arrested? So I do think this is a suitable ending. Crooked House is a spectacular entry into the Christieverse with its strong plot, characters, and twists, but it falls just short of the top spot here at number 2. And now for number 1, and I mean, come on, was this ever in doubt? It's the best standalone Christie, it's the best Christie, it's the best mystery novel of all time, and quite possibly the best novel of all time, and that is And Then There Were None. And I don't know what I can say about this novel that hasn't been said a million times before. The amount of planning Christie had to do to pull off this novel must have been extraordinary. There are so many pieces to this novel that it all comes together to form the greatest mystery novel of all time. Let's start with the characters. All 10 of the people on Soldier Island are fantastic characters, even the ones who die earlier on who we don't get to know as well, such as Marston and Mrs. Rogers. I know everything about them. I know where they came from and what they did. I know the effects of their past crimes have not only on their inner thoughts and guilt, but in the way they communicate with others and how they act on the island. For example, we have Lombard, who isn't at all full of guilt, has no regrets, and continues to act just in that manner, with very little planning and always willing to take the risk. I love as the book progresses just how increasingly depraved the characters become. They've shed all pretenses and fall into survival mode. Some of them have nightmares, like Dr. Armstrong, who dreams of butchering his victim on the operating table. The way Christie is able to portray these gruesome acts without going into graphic detail, yet is able to make us feel as if we are witnessing these things firsthand is amazing. No matter how many times I read this book, I still shiver and twitch when I read certain passages. The overall concept of And Then There Were None is genius. Christie often explores the themes of justice in her books, and here we have 10 people who have committed murder, allegedly, and gotten away with it. And these people are the antitheses of mystery novels where justice and order must be restored. Thus, these people have to be held accountable. Yet, Christie also explores why she thinks people cannot take the law into their own hands in several other novels. She has created this scenario where these two ideas clash. These people must be held accountable, but the law cannot do so, so someone else must. And that brings us to Justice Wargrave, who I find to be one of the most fascinating characters in any work of fiction. He's this conceited judge who has always wanted to murder people, but it has to be the right people. And I love how arrogant and how much of an ass he is. He's very hypocritical. He's supposed to represent law and order, but then decides he could abandon these principles at the first opportunity he has. When the reader reads his confession at the end of the story, one can't help but decide against him and feel sympathy for his rather horrid victims. You don't get the sense that his moral compunction for justice led him to murder these people, but rather he did so for his own entertainment and perhaps to satisfy his own ego. But he makes an excellent killer. I love the way he deceives the other guests, especially Armstrong, whom he plays like a fiddle. I always loved their dynamic and how Wargrave knew he could use his position in society to manipulate Armstrong into doing anything, including ruining his own chances of survival. I love how he lies to us in his confessional. He claims that he murdered them, starting with the least guilty, so that the most guilty person would feel the fear of wondering when they will be next. But in reality, he just kills them whenever he has the chance. He has to kill them when the opportunity arises to do so, and has to disregard any specific order he may have had. I think some of the tricks Christie employs in this book are fantastic. I'll just talk about one, and that is the trick of Wargrave faking his death. And I know this is controversial, but it doesn't break any of the rules of detective fiction, and it does play fair. This is a very good trick because one is not likely to suspect a character whom we believe is dead, and this is a solvable mystery. I know a lot of people claim that it is not, but when Wargrave and Armstrong fake the judge's death, they use Mrs. Brent's missing wool and the previous stolen bath curtain. However, we are told very early on that both of these items are missing, so we should deduce that the judge's fake death was concocted well before there was any need to. The clues are there. Several people are murdered in between the time these two items went missing and between the time when the judge was killed, allegedly, that is. Armstrong should not be fooled by this, but he is too trusting and too naive. He falls for it, and so does the reader, albeit only the most astute reader will see through it. I could go on and on about And Then There Were None, but I'll stop here for the sake of this video's length. It is one of the best books of all time, so it belongs here at number 1. And that's it for this video. I will return to create more Christie content in the future. There are so many fun ideas I have, like ranking murderers and victims and other characters, and I can do so much more with Christie than I can with other mystery novelists because I know her works inside and out, and she's one of the most popular authors that so many people will just know what I'm talking about. But next week, I am moving on to another author. I will begin my three-part ranking of all 32 Roderick Allen novels written by Niall Marsh. If you want to keep up to date with the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button, like this video, and drop a comment in the comment sections. Until next time, Mystery Files.